Chapter 1. The Perfect Setup. Sophia stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, her fingers delicately adjusting the clasp of the silver necklace that glittered against her skin. The necklace wasn't just an accessory, it was symbolic, a piece Jacob had gifted her on their anniversary 5 years ago. At the time, it had meant everything to her, a sign of their love, their future. Now it felt like a chain that had been used to bind her to years of deception. She tightened it around her neck with purpose. The irony wasn't lost on her. Tonight, she would be the one to break those chains. She leaned in closer to the mirror, scrutinizing every detail of her reflection. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, a few loose strands framing her face just the way Jacob liked. Her eyes, however, held a glint that no amount of makeup could soften. They sparkled with a deadly calm, masking the storm of emotions that had been brewing for months, no, years. Tonight was the culmination of all her pain, her rage, and her meticulous plotting. And it had to be perfect. After all, she had spent countless hours crafting a plan so seamless that no one would see it coming until it was far too late. The dress she wore was another piece of strategic brilliance, a deep, velvety blue gown that hugged her figure in all the right places. Tasteful, but undeniably alluring. She remembered the day she bought it, 2 weeks ago. Jacob had seen her in it and had complimented her with that fake sincerity he'd become so good at, the kind that made her stomach turn. But he had no idea that every choice she made that evening, every calculated smile and every thoughtful word, was part of a grand design. Sophia allowed herself a small smile as she stepped back from the mirror, admiring the final result. This was the last time she'd look at herself as the woman Jacob had taken for granted. After tonight, she would become someone else, someone liberated, someone who had taken control of her destiny and his downfall. A spark of excitement flared in her chest. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was more like the calm before a storm, when the air feels electric, full of untapped energy just waiting to explode. She turned her attention to the small stack of invitations still sitting on her dresser, the embossed gold lettering glinting under the soft light. She had mailed them weeks ago, carefully selecting the perfect guest list. Close friends, family, business associates, people who believed they knew the couple so well. And of course, she had made sure that Jacob's secret mistress, Emma, would be there, the pièce de résistance. No one would question why Emma had been invited. She was, after all, the pretty young assistant who had worked closely with Jacob during his climb to senior vice president. To the outside world, Emma was just another colleague. But Sophia knew better. And soon, everyone else would too. As she rehearsed the details of the evening in her mind, Sophia felt the familiar twinge of disgust she had come to associate with her husband. She had known about the affair for nearly a year. The first time she'd found a clue, an errant text message that appeared on Jacob's phone while he showered. She had been devastated. The raw pain of betrayal had almost consumed her, but rather than confront him in a fit of emotional fury, she had done something far more dangerous. She had kept quiet. She had waited. Patience was the ultimate weapon. Sophia had learned that over time. Jacob had been oblivious to her discovery, carrying on with Emma behind her back, convinced that his wife was blissfully unaware of his indiscretions. He'd grown careless, cocky, and that arrogance would be his undoing. The plan had taken shape slowly at first, a seed planted in Sophia's mind that grew with each passing day. She could have confronted him in private, torn his life apart in the privacy of their own home. But that would have been too easy for him, too easy for Emma. No, Sophia wanted something more. She wanted the world to know who Jacob truly was. She wanted to see him stripped of the power and prestige he so loved, to watch as everything he'd built crumbled in the most public way possible. And tonight, at the celebration of his latest success, his promotion to senior vice president at one of the city's top financial firms, she would make sure that everyone in attendance bore witness to his fall from grace. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie, and moments later, Jacob appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his custom-tailored suit. He looked every bit the confident, charming man he had always been, his dark hair neatly combed, his smile disarming. For a brief moment, she wondered how she had ever loved him so deeply. He had been her world once, Her entire life wrapped around his success, his happiness. And now, that same smile, the one she used to fall for, made her skin crawl. "Are you ready?" Jacob asked, his tone casual, oblivious. He glanced at her with the practiced appreciation of a man who knew his wife looked beautiful, but didn't really care beyond how it would reflect on him. Everyone's starting to arrive downstairs. Sophia turned to face him, her expression perfectly composed, her lips curling into the same soft smile she had perfected over the years. "Of course, darling. I wouldn't miss your big night for the world." The sweetness in her voice was a thin veneer, concealing the venom underneath. She stepped toward him, and he kissed her on the cheek, another gesture that once would have made her heart flutter, but now only fueled her resolve. As Jacob left the room, Sophia lingered for a moment longer, listening to the faint sounds of the party growing louder downstairs. She could hear the familiar voices of their friends and family, all of them gathered to celebrate Jacob's success, completely unaware that they were about to witness the most shocking revelation of their lives. Sophia took one final look in the mirror, her hand brushing lightly against the necklace. It felt cold against her skin, a reminder of the ice in her veins. Tonight wasn't about her grief anymore. It wasn't about the broken promises, the shattered trust. Tonight was about reclaiming her power, about taking back control of her life, and ensuring that Jacob felt every ounce of pain he had inflicted on her, magnified by the weight of public disgrace. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with one final glance at the woman she had become, Sophia squared her shoulders and made her way downstairs, ready to step into the role she had been preparing for all along, the woman who would destroy Jacob Turner, not just as a husband, but as a man. The night had only just begun, and by the end of it, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 2. The celebration begins. The house buzzed with life as the guests mingled in the grand living room, their conversations blending into a low, melodious hum that filled every corner of the space. It was the kind of gathering that radiated luxury, subtle but unmistakable, like the understated elegance of the silk drapes that framed the massive windows or the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers casting warm, flattering light over the guests. It was the perfect setting for a night like this, a celebration of Jacob's latest achievement, his promotion to senior vice president. The room practically pulsed with the energy of success. Sophia stood at the top of the staircase, taking it all in. The clink of champagne flutes, the smooth sound of jazz drifting from the live band in the corner, the scent of gourmet hors d'oeuvres floating through the air. It was all part of the atmosphere she had orchestrated. Everything had been meticulously planned, down to the color of the flowers that adorned the tables and the arrangement of the seating, designed to make sure the right people were talking to each other at the right time. No detail had been overlooked, and now, as the evening was in full swing, it was all playing out like a perfectly executed performance. She descended the staircase slowly, her hand grazing the cool banister as her gaze swept over the room. Jacob was, of course, at the center of attention. He stood in a circle of admirers, laughing, shaking hands, his charm as magnetic as ever. He wore that confident smile, the one that had once captivated her, the one he used now to disarm his colleagues, his friends, even his enemies. He thrived in this kind of environment, the spotlight, the adoration, the subtle flattery from every corner of the room. It was his stage, and tonight, he was the star. Sophia moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her face adorned with the perfect hostess smile. She exchanged pleasantries with guests, effortlessly navigating through conversations that required just enough engagement to be polite, but not enough to distract her from her real purpose. As she passed each group, she nodded, laughed at the right moments, accepted compliments on the party with humble modesty, and allowed her eyes to flicker discreetly to the far side of the room, where Emma stood. There she was, Jacob's secret. Dressed in a form-fitting black dress, her beauty was almost otherworldly. The kind of beauty that draws eyes without trying, the kind that makes people wonder who she is before they even know her name. Emma's skin seemed to glow under the dim lighting, her long dark hair cascading in soft waves down her back. She was, undeniably, stunning. The kind of woman who turned heads. It was no surprise that Jacob had fallen for her. But Sophia wasn't intimidated. No, Emma's beauty was just another part of the puzzle. She was the key to making tonight's revelation truly unforgettable. Without her, the impact wouldn't be as profound. Sophia needed Emma to be present, to be a visible reminder of Jacob's betrayal. There was a cold satisfaction in knowing that Emma had no idea what was about to happen. She was here, thinking she was just another guest, unaware that she was walking into a trap. Sophia caught Emma's eye from across the room and waved with a friendly smile. It was a practiced gesture, one that looked sincere to anyone watching. Emma returned the smile, seemingly unaware of the tension lurking beneath the surface. She waved back, clearly flattered by the attention from Jacob's wife. The innocent exchange was laden with irony. Sophia was, after all, pretending to welcome the very woman who had been sleeping with her husband. As the night wore on, the air became thicker with celebration. More guests arrived, adding to the crowd, and the conversations grew louder. Laughter echoed through the house, and the waiters moved elegantly through the clusters of people, refilling glasses of champagne and offering trays of exquisite canapés. Jacob was in his element. He navigated from group to group with ease, shaking hands, exchanging inside jokes, and sharing laughs with his colleagues. His booming voice occasionally rang out above the crowd, a magnetic pull for anyone within earshot. Sophia continued to weave through the room, her movements as smooth as the flowing champagne. Every now and then she glanced at Jacob, catching snippets of his conversations. He was the charming man everyone believed him to be, the devoted husband, the brilliant businessman, the man who seemed to have it all. But only Sophia knew the truth. Only she knew that behind the dazzling smile was a man who had betrayed her, a man who would soon face the consequences of his actions. Finally, as the evening reached its crescendo, Jacob moved to the center of the room, raising his glass high. The music softened, and gradually the room fell silent as the guests turned to face him. All eyes were on him now. It was time. Sophia's heart quickened slightly. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had planned so carefully. Her face remained calm, composed, but inside she could feel the tension building. The excitement of what was about to unfold was almost overwhelming. Jacob cleared his throat, flashing a confident smile at the room. "I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice commanding attention. "This promotion means the world to me, and it wouldn't have been possible without the incredible people in this room. Friends, family, and of course, my colleagues." His eyes scanned the crowd, his tone gracious and humble. He was putting on a show, basking in the admiration of the people who had come to celebrate him. And they loved it. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. And most importantly, Jacob continued, his voice growing softer, more intimate. "I couldn't have done any of this without the support of my amazing wife, Sophia." Sophia felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward her. She met their gazes with a demure smile, as though she was embarrassed by the attention. But inside she was savoring every second. Jacob raised his glass in her direction, and the guests followed suit, their glasses lifting toward her in unison. "To Sophia," Jacob said warmly, his eyes meeting hers, "the love of my life, and my partner in everything." There was a murmur of approval, and a few guests even clapped lightly. Sophia's smile remained steady, though she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins now. The moment was so close. She could almost taste it. As Jacob turned his attention back to the crowd, Sophia could feel the shift in the room's energy. Everyone was still smiling, but there was an almost imperceptible tension building. They were waiting for something more. Sophia had been careful to let the evening build to this point, to make sure the anticipation was at its peak. And now, as Jacob moved to finish his toast, she knew the stage was set. "And finally," Jacob said, his voice booming once again, "thank you to all of you. Your support has been everything to me. This success is as much yours as it is mine." There was a smattering of applause, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking filled the room once more. But as the guests turned their attention back to their conversations, Sophia knew it was time to make her move. The perfect moment had arrived. Sophia gently placed her glass on a nearby table and began to make her way through the crowd, her heart steady, her mind laser-focused. Jacob had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The celebration was about to transform into a spectacle no one would ever forget. Chapter 3. The Unveiling. Sophia stood beside Jacob, the picture of composure and grace. Her hand gently rested on his arm, a familiar gesture that felt both intimate and public. She could feel the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his suit, but it meant nothing to her now, just another touch from a man she no longer recognized. Her smile was soft, sweet even, but beneath it lay the razor-sharp edge of the moment she had been meticulously building toward. This was the climax, the crescendo of her carefully plotted revenge. "Darling, if I may," Sophia began, her voice laced with the kind of sincerity that could disarm anyone, especially Jacob, who had no inkling of what was about to unfold. She turned her face toward him, her expression soft, almost adoring, as if she were just another devoted wife looking to celebrate her husband's big night. "I have a little surprise for you." Jacob blinked, caught off guard. "A surprise?" he repeated, chuckling, his eyes bright with the glow of adoration from his colleagues and friends. He didn't expect anything more than a sweet gesture, perhaps a heartfelt speech to cap off the evening's festivities. His pride swelled, fed by the admiration of those around him. "What's this about?" His voice was full of warmth and affection. Sophia's hand tightened subtly on his arm as she gave a light laugh, turning to address the room. "I wanted to make tonight extra special for Jacob, given all his hard work and dedication. So I've prepared something to honor him in a way that everyone here will appreciate." Her eyes gleamed as she reached into her purse, pulling out a sleek remote control. The guests, curious, turned their heads toward the large screen mounted on the wall behind them, the focal point of the evening's coming revelation. Some even exchanged knowing smiles, expecting perhaps a slideshow of Jacob's career accomplishments, something sentimental to celebrate his success. Jacob, ever the optimist, stood straighter, his chest puffing up slightly in anticipation. He gave a little nod, looking around the room with a sheepish grin. "She always knows how to make things memorable," he said to the guests closest to him, giving Sophia's hand a gentle squeeze. But Sophia didn't acknowledge his touch. She was focused, her thumb already pressing down on the button of the remote. The screen flickered to life behind them, the lights in the room dimming slightly as the attention of every guest shifted to the images on display. At first, it was exactly what everyone expected. A montage of Jacob's professional triumphs filled the screen, photos of him shaking hands with industry leaders, receiving awards, smiling at high-profile events. Each image was a testament to his rise in the financial world, painting a flattering picture of a man who had it all: power, success, and a devoted wife by his side. There was a soft murmur of approval from the crowd as the first few images played. A few guests clapped lightly, some nodded in recognition of Jacob's many accomplishments. But Sophia stood still, watching the room with a keen eye, waiting for the moment when the atmosphere would change. And then it did. The next image appeared on the screen. At first it seemed innocuous: Jacob and a woman seated at a restaurant, laughing together over dinner. But something was off. The woman wasn't Sophia. She was younger, her smile bright and flirtatious, her hand resting casually on Jacob's arm. It was Emma. Sophia felt the shift in the room almost immediately. The casual smiles faded. A few people furrowed their brows, glancing around in confusion. What was this? The image lingered for a beat too long, and then the next picture appeared. This one was unmistakable. Jacob and Emma again, but this time his hand rested on her waist, his fingers lingering in a way that spoke of intimacy. The room fell deathly silent. The guests stared at the screen in disbelief as image after image flashed before their eyes, each one more damning than the last. Jacob and Emma kissing in a dimly lit hotel lobby. Jacob leading Emma into a private suite. Jacob's hand entwined with hers as they walked along the beach, a romantic getaway hidden from everyone but Sophia's watchful eyes. The collective gasp from the crowd reverberated through the room, followed by a heavy silence that seemed to press down on everyone. Jacob stood frozen beside her, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. His face paled as the realization began to sink in. He had been caught, and not just by Sophia, by everyone. Sophia turned to him, her smile never wavering. "And there's more," she said, her voice calm, even pleasant, as if they were simply discussing dinner plans. She gestured toward the screen again. "I've also prepared something else. Some of the messages and emails you've sent to Emma over the past few months. They're truly beautiful." Jacob's breath hitched, panic rising in his throat. "Sophia!" he started, his voice cracking. What are you doing?" But it was too late. The screen shifted again, this time revealing a series of texts. The words were bold, displayed for everyone to see, texts filled with declarations of love, of passion, of promises that should have belonged to Sophia, but had been whispered instead to Emma. Explicit, raw emotions that left no room for ambiguity. Jacob had poured his heart into these messages, never imagining that they would one day be read by his colleagues, his family, and his wife. "I can't stop thinking about you, Emma. I'll tell Sophia soon. We'll be together. You're the love of my life. I've never felt like this with anyone before." The words hung in the air, each one landing like a punch. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Some guests covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered to each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. Sophia could feel the weight of their collective judgment settling on Jacob, crushing him beneath the reality of what he had done. Jacob stumbled backward, his legs unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had given way. "Sophia, this can't be real," he stammered, his voice hoarse with desperation. He reached out toward her, but she stepped back, just out of his reach. She met his gaze, her eyes cold, unyielding. "Oh, it's real, Jacob. All of it. Every lie, every betrayal. It's all here for everyone to see." Jacob's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His face had turned a sickly shade of white, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. He glanced around the room, searching for support, but all he found were faces filled with pity, shock, and disgust. His colleagues, his friends, none of them were on his side now. They had seen everything. There was no going back. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the revelation. Sophia could feel the walls closing in on Jacob, trapping him in the web he had spun for himself. He had thought he could deceive her, thought he could live two lives without consequence. But now, there was no escape. Sophia let the silence linger for a moment longer before she spoke again, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You see, Jacob, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed everyone in this room. And now they all know the truth." Jacob opened his mouth to protest, to defend himself. But the words never came. There was nothing left to say. The damage was done. Sophia stepped back, watching as Jacob crumbled before her, his once proud demeanor shattered beyond repair. Chapter 4. The Mistress's Move. Sophia's pulse quickened as the weight of her plan settled in the air, hanging over the room like a storm cloud. Jacob, pale and trembling, looked every bit the broken man she had envisioned. His shoulders slumped under the realization that his lies, his betrayals, had been meticulously laid bare before the people whose opinions he valued most. She could almost taste the satisfaction that coursed through her veins. This was the moment she had waited for, the perfect execution of her revenge. But then, in the silence that followed Jacob's public humiliation, a shift occurred. Out of the corner of her eye, Sophia caught sight of Emma. The younger woman who had been standing near the back of the room had not left in shame or embarrassment as Sophia had expected. Instead, Emma's posture straightened, and the expression on her face morphed from shock into something far more calculated, something dangerous. Without warning, Emma stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she crossed the room. Her confidence was startling, her movements deliberate, as if she had just been waiting for this very moment. Sophia felt a jolt of uncertainty ripple through her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. What was Emma doing? The guests, already reeling from the spectacle of Jacob's infidelity, now turned their attention to Emma, sensing another twist in the night's drama. Sophia narrowed her eyes, her heart thudding in her chest as Emma reached the front of the room. The tension thickened, the air humming with anticipation. And then, Emma spoke. "Actually, Sophia," Emma began, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the whispers of the crowd. "There's something you should know." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate what Emma could possibly add to the spectacle that had already unfolded. She had orchestrated this evening down to the smallest detail. Nothing had been left to chance. But Emma's calm demeanor, her sudden boldness, hinted at something else, something Sophia hadn't accounted for. "I wasn't the only one." Emma's eyes flickered with a glint of satisfaction as she delivered her line, her gaze sweeping over the room, drawing everyone into her revelation. Her words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. The crowd, already on edge, erupted into a fresh wave of gasps and murmurs. Sophia's blood ran cold. The certainty that had fueled her throughout the night began to crack at the edges, her perfect control slipping through her fingers. This was supposed to be her moment, not Emma's. She had exposed Jacob's affair with the younger woman in front of everyone. That had been the plan. But now the story was evolving into something far more chaotic, something beyond Sophia's careful design. "What are you talking about?" Sophia asked, her voice low but sharp, her eyes fixed on Emma with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. Emma didn't hesitate. She turned to the crowd, her confidence growing with every passing second. "Jacob's been seeing other women besides me," she said, her tone almost casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "I found out a few months ago, and I've been gathering my own evidence. It seems your husband has been very busy." A collective gasp rippled through the room like a wave, crashing against the carefully constructed image of Jacob's life. The whispers grew louder, the shock palpable as Emma's words sank in. What had started as a scandalous affair was now unraveling into something far more damaging. Sophia's grip tightened on the edge of the podium, her knuckles white as she fought to maintain her composure. Emma wasn't finished. With a deliberate motion, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly over the screen, and with a few quick taps, she connected her phone to the projector. The guests, who had barely recovered from the first round of revelations, turned their attention to the screen once more, expecting nothing less than another bombshell. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as the screen flickered to life again. This time, it wasn't just photos of Jacob and Emma. It was worse, far worse. The first image showed Jacob with another woman, someone neither Sophia nor anyone else in the room had ever seen before. The two of them were seated at a cozy cafe, laughing together over drinks, their body language intimate, familiar. Then, another image. A different woman this time, walking hand in hand with Jacob along a secluded beach at sunset. The next photo showed yet another woman, caught in a passionate embrace with Jacob in a darkened hotel hallway. Sophia's stomach turned as the images kept coming, one after the other, each more damning than the last. Jacob wasn't just unfaithful. He was a serial adulterer, his betrayals stacking up like a house of cards ready to collapse. The room had devolved into chaos. Guests were openly murmuring, some pointing at the screen in disbelief, others shaking their heads, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. The whispers of betrayal spread like wildfire, and Sophia could feel the weight of the scandal pressing down on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. This was not how she had imagined the evening playing out. Jacob, now trembling visibly, took a step forward, his voice cracking as he tried to defend himself. This isn't true. This is all. But the words were meaningless. No one in the room believed him anymore. The evidence was too overwhelming, too damning to be refuted. His once proud image, the carefully curated persona he had built over the years, had been utterly obliterated. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing. She had anticipated Jacob's humiliation, planned for the moment when he would fall apart in front of everyone. But she hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't planned for Emma's betrayal, for the revelation that Jacob had betrayed both of them. The evening was spiraling out of her control, turning into a public spectacle that was rapidly slipping from her grasp. Emma, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the chaos. She smiled, a small, satisfied smile, before turning back to Sophia. "I thought you deserved to know the full extent of his lies," she said softly, her voice almost kind. But there was no kindness in her eyes, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had been wronged and was determined to make the most of the fallout. For a brief moment, Sophia felt a surge of anger. Emma had hijacked her night, turned her carefully orchestrated revenge into a free-for-all of Jacob's sins. But as she looked at the screen, at the damning evidence Emma had presented, something else settled over her, a realization that this was bigger than her plan. Jacob wasn't just her betrayer, he had betrayed everyone. As the room continued to buzz with disbelief, Sophia took a step back, her eyes still locked on Emma. The younger woman had changed everything in an instant, and now the night was no longer about Sophia's revenge. It was about the complete and utter destruction of Jacob's life, and in that destruction, Sophia realized, there was a strange kind of freedom. Chapter 5. The Final Blow. The air in the room was thick with shock, tension simmering like a fire about to consume everything in its path. The murmurs from the crowd had turned into a low hum of disbelief, punctuated by gasps and whispered exclamations. Jacob, the once proud figure who had dominated the room, now stood at the center of it all, pale, trembling, and utterly defeated. "Wait!" His voice cracked as he stumbled forward, his hands outstretched as if trying to grasp at some invisible thread that could hold his world together. He turned from face to face, seeking refuge in familiar eyes. But there was none. His colleagues, the ones who had toasted to his success just an hour ago, were now edging away, shaking their heads in silent judgment. Their once gleaming smiles were replaced by looks of disdain and horror. "Sophia, please," he begged, his voice hoarse, barely audible over the din of whispers. His eyes locked onto hers, desperate, searching for some sign of the woman who had once loved him, who had once been his partner in everything. But Sophia stood still, unmoved. Her gaze, steady and cold, pierced through him with the force of 1,000 unspoken truths. There was no love left in those eyes, no mercy. "Don't do this, not like this," Jacob pleaded, his voice breaking as he gestured to the room full of onlookers. "Please, just talk to me. We can fix this." His words tumbled out in a frantic rush, as if he could somehow undo the wreckage of his infidelities by sheer force of will. But no one was listening. The weight of his betrayals had crashed down around him, and the room that once buzzed with celebratory energy now felt suffocating. Even his family, who had once been his greatest supporters, now stood at a distance, their faces twisted in disgust. His mother, normally so proud of her golden boy, couldn't even meet his eyes. His father, stoic and grim, shook his head slowly as if to say, "You've destroyed everything." Jacob's friends, those who hadn't already slipped quietly out the door, shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react to the spectacle unfolding before them. They had known Jacob for years, had celebrated his victories, laughed at his jokes, admired his charm. But this was beyond their comprehension. Their hero had fallen, and there was no salvaging him from the wreckage. In the midst of the swirling chaos, Sophia remained an island of calm. Her posture was regal, her shoulders squared as she watched Jacob flail. The night hadn't unfolded exactly as she had planned. Emma's unexpected reveal had added an element of unpredictability, but the result was far more devastating than she could have imagined. Jacob was ruined. He wasn't just exposed as an unfaithful husband. He was now a man utterly destroyed, personally, professionally, and socially. Sophia's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. This was what she had waited for. This was the justice she had painstakingly crafted. Emma, meanwhile, stood near the exit, having delivered her final blow. She watched the fallout unfold with a satisfied smirk, her arms crossed over her chest as if to say, "I've played my part." The younger woman, who had once been Jacob's secret, had now become the detonator of his destruction. She met Sophia's gaze across the room, her eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and amusement. "I guess we both got what we wanted, didn't we?" Emma's voice was low, but laced with smug satisfaction. There was no need for pretense anymore. The night had laid bare all their secrets. Sophia regarded her coolly, her expression unflinching. "I suppose we did." Her voice was calm, almost detached, as if the entire ordeal had played out exactly as she had expected. In that moment, there was a silent understanding between the two women, an acknowledgement of their shared victory, however different their motives might have been. Emma flashed her a knowing smile before turning on her heel and striding confidently out of the room. Her exit was as poised as her entrance had been, her head held high as she left Jacob to face the full brunt of the destruction she had helped unleash. The door clicked shut behind Emma, and for a moment there was a heavy silence in the room. The weight of the evening pressed down on everyone like a suffocating blanket, the enormity of Jacob's betrayal sinking in fully now. There was no coming back from this. Not for him. Jacob, standing in the eye of the storm, seemed smaller now, diminished, broken. He looked at Sophia one last time, his eyes red, filled with tears. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing left to say. Sophia stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She stopped just inches from him, her eyes locking onto his. Her voice was barely a whisper, but each word cut through the air with deadly precision. "This is what you deserve, Jacob. You betrayed me, and now you've lost everything." Jacob's face crumpled at her words. The finality of her statement, the cold truth behind it, left no room for redemption. He had nothing left, no defense, no more lies to hide behind. Sophia held his gaze for a moment longer, ensuring he felt the full weight of his ruin. Then, without another word, she turned away, her back straight, her head held high. The room parted for her as she walked, the guests watching in stunned silence as she made her way to the exit. The heels of her shoes echoed through the vast space, each step a reminder of the power she now held over him. Jacob stood frozen, watching her walk away, knowing in that moment that she had not only destroyed his life, she had taken control of the narrative. He was no longer the man in power, no longer the successful businessman, the charming husband, the admired friend. He was nothing. Sophia reached the door, paused for a brief second, and then stepped out into the cool night air. The world outside felt different now, lighter, as if she had finally shed the weight of the years of lies and deceit. She inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, cleansing her of the toxicity that had suffocated her for so long. Behind her, in the house filled with shattered remnants of Jacob's life, the door closed with a final, resounding click. And with that, Sophia left him to drown in the ruins of his once perfect world. Epilogue. The weeks that followed the party felt like a slow, inevitable unraveling of Jacob's life, each day peeling away another layer of the carefully constructed facade he had once worn with such pride. What had begun as a night of celebration quickly became the moment everything collapsed. Jacob's world had always been defined by his success. His promotion to senior vice president had seemed like the crowning achievement of his career, a position that granted him the admiration of his colleagues and the respect of the business community. But the fallout from Sophia's revelation spread like wildfire. The night of his public exposure had been the talk of the city's social circles, and the repercussions were swift and unforgiving. His promotion was rescinded within days. The partners at the firm, who had once lauded through greed, arrogance, and betrayal. He spent his days in a haze of regret, replaying the events that had led to his downfall over and over again in his mind. Every decision, every affair, every lie, each one seemed so insignificant at the time, but now they loomed over him like a mountain of mistakes, impossible to climb out from beneath. The weight of it all crushed him. In the end, both women had gotten their revenge, though in very different ways. Sophia had meticulously plotted Jacob's public downfall, exposing his secrets and stripping him of everything that mattered, his wealth, his status, his pride. But more than that, she had reclaimed her own life. She hadn't just punished Jacob, she had freed herself from him entirely. Emma's revenge had been more personal, more impulsive. She had been burned by Jacob too, learning that she wasn't his only affair, and in the end, she had made sure he knew it. Her final act was one of retribution, revealing his true nature not just to Sophia, but to the world. Then, with nothing left to gain, she disappeared, leaving Jacob to pick up the pieces of his shattered existence. And Jacob? He had nothing. No career, no marriage, no reputation. He was a man utterly alone, left to reflect on the choices that had led him to this place, choices that, in the end, had cost him everything. The night of the party had been the beginning of the end for Jacob, but for Sophia and Emma, it had been the final, perfect blow. They had played their parts brilliantly, and when all was said and done, they walked away, leaving Jacob to drown in the consequences of his own actions. His ambition and charm now viewed him as a liability. Meetings once filled with congratulatory handshakes became strained and awkward. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, the glances more accusatory. It wasn't long before Jacob's superiors made it clear that his presence was no longer welcome. The official reasoning was vague, something about the damage to the firm's reputation. But the message was clear. Jacob had become a pariah in the very world he once ruled. His colleagues distanced themselves, those who had once been his closest allies now avoiding him in every way they could. Lunch invitations dried up, emails went unanswered, and the easy camaraderie he had enjoyed disappeared overnight. Jacob's office, once bustling with activity, now felt like a cold, empty tomb. The silence was suffocating. At home, things were no better. Sophia had wasted no time. The very next day, she had met with her lawyer, filing for divorce with a swiftness that caught Jacob off guard. He tried to talk to her, tried to plead for another chance, but she was done listening. The moment she had walked out of that party, Sophia had moved on. The divorce proceedings were quick and merciless. She had everything prepared: bank records, evidence of his affairs, legal documentation. And with each step, it became clearer to Jacob that she had been preparing for this for a long time. The settlement was brutal. Sophia took half of everything: his savings, the house, the cars, everything they had built together. It didn't matter that he had been the one with the high-paying job. The evidence she had meticulously gathered during the years of his betrayals made her case unassailable. The court ruled in her favor, and Jacob watched helplessly as his once luxurious life was divided and handed over to the woman he had wronged. Sophia's departure from his life was just as decisive. She moved out of the house they had shared for years, leaving Jacob to wander its empty rooms alone. There was no bitterness in her parting. In fact, she had barely acknowledged him as she packed her things. She had already moved on, emotionally and mentally, long before that final confrontation. For her, this was simply the closing of a chapter that had long since ended in her heart. In her new life, Sophia thrived. The weight of Jacob's lies, the years of playing the perfect wife, had lifted from her shoulders, and she embraced her freedom with a sense of calm empowerment. She found a new home in a different part of the city, a beautiful townhouse filled with light, and began focusing on her own passions, things she had set aside during her marriage. She reconnected with old friends, dove into her career, and started living for herself again. She was no longer defined by her role as Jacob's wife. She was just Sophia now, independent, strong, and finally free. And as for Emma, she disappeared as quickly as she had entered their lives. The night of the party had been her final act of defiance, a calculated move to expose Jacob's other betrayals before quietly vanishing. For weeks, Jacob searched for her, desperate for answers, but she was nowhere to be found. Her phone number was disconnected, her social media accounts deleted, and the apartment she had once rented was vacant. There were rumors, of course. Some said she had left the city, moving to Europe or the West Coast to start fresh. Others whispered that she had found someone new, another wealthy, unsuspecting man to charm and manipulate. But wherever Emma went, she left behind nothing but the memory of that fateful night. Her final act had been not just a betrayal of Jacob, but a severing of ties with the chaos she had helped create. Jacob was left alone with his ruin, his reputation in tatters, his career obliterated, and his social standing reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered at parties and networking events. Once he had been admired and envied, but now people spoke his name with pity or disdain. He had become the embodiment of failure, a man who had it all and lost it,